Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another great edition of Sports Étouffée. I'm your host, Logan Graffia, and on today's show, we have guest Bob Rose of the Saints News Network talking about the outlook of the Saints going into the draft, discussing all the free agency moves there and more. Then, afterwards, we have my good friend Taylor Sharp of 104.5 ESPN in Baton Rouge discussing all things LSU football and what the team looks like in spring so far. So, without further ado, let's get this show started. My first guest today here on Sports Étouffée is someone who I absolutely am a huge fan of, love all of his work. Bob Rose from the Saints News Network. Bob, thank you so much for joining me today to talk some Saints, man.
Logan, anytime. Thank you for having me. Hope you're doing well, my friend.
Oh, same back to you. So, get right into it. So, we're close to the NFL draft, but before we get to the draft talk, I want to talk just the outlook of the team in general this offseason. They've kind of had a somewhat quiet free agency and offseason outside of restructuring contracts as they always do. So, your takeaway just from kind of like the quiet offseason so far?
Well, I tell you, we all expect, and I know you did too. We all expected this offseason to be quiet as far as the open market activity on free agency. Yeah, I consider this offseason a success so far for a few reasons. Number one, I love the hire of Clint Kubiak as the offensive coordinator and really all the offensive coaches that they added. I think Saints fans should be really excited to see what we're going to get on that side of the ball. And secondly, anytime you see a team that's as far over the cap as the Saints were coming into the offseason, and you manage to head towards the draft without really releasing or parting with any significant veterans. I mean, we saw the Miami Dolphins have a fire sale. We saw the Buffalo Bills, jettison or not be able to re-sign several of their players. And it's kind of old routine, for Saints fans and us media that cover them. The New Orleans, most of their offseason is going to be, centered around restructures, and just redoing the contracts of their veterans. But in the process, I mean, you're able to keep guys like Tyrann Mathieu, Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, and the list goes on and on and on. While several other teams did not, could not say the same thing. Not only this offseason, but several others. I love the signing of Willie Gay Jr. at linebacker. I wish it was for longer than a one-year deal, but I think, Saints fans, if you're not familiar with this young man, he is going to add a lot of athleticism and a lot of coverage ability at linebacker. Finally, the running mate we've all been waiting for to get from Demario Davis, which will allow Joe Woods and Dennis Allen to play Pete Werner more in the box and as a downhill defender where he's best suited. And then, they went and signed, added some more linebacker depth with Kalike Hudson, receiver depth with Cedric Wilson Jr., who, remember, only a couple of short years ago, was a quality wideout, number 3 wideout for the Dallas Cowboys. Remember, Saints fans, we don't need a certified number 2 wideout. The trio of, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, and even A.T. Perry, I think is going to be a nice trio for this offense. While I still expect New Orleans to add another receiver or 2 in the draft, I think Cedric Wilson fills out this depth chart nicely. And then you talk about Chase Young, assuming his neck surgery goes well. This is a guy out to prove that he was worth the number 2 overall draft pick just a few years ago. And I think you're going to get a hungry player. And if I'm right, then the Saints addressed a big need at edge rusher. The only significant need they really didn't address in free agency was the offensive line. And that's their biggest need on the entire team, Logan, as you know, and as you've written about and spoken about yourself also, not just tackle, but guard. But you look at the free agent money that these offensive linemen were getting and the situation that the Saints are in with the salary cap. I'm not surprised that they weren't able to bring in any linemen. I think that that's something that they're going to address very early and maybe a few times throughout this draft.
I can only agree with you about the offensive lineman. And while we're on the topic of that, you brought up veterans too. I mean, one, I kind of saw this coming, maybe even January. I even said on Twitter that he should retire. Ryan Ramczyk. So, do you think with the news of his surgery kind of like relapsing in a way and not going well, as Dennis Allen put it, that kind of changed their draft plans? Because at first we were all discussing, hey, they ought to take an edge rusher round one like Jarrett Verse or somebody.
Mhm.
So do you think that kind of changed their course of action on their draft board, like to go for the tackle from Penn State? I don't want to butcher his name, or maybe Troy Fuatu from Oregon State. I mean, there's so many offensive linemen you can get, even guards like Cooper Beebe and many others, Graham Barton. The list goes on and on for offensive linemen in this draft. But do you think that kind of just Ryan Ramczyk's changed the course of action?
It certainly changed the course, perception-wise. Even us media that cover the team, we knew Ram's knee was in bad shape. We've known it for the last couple of years. It's sort of a degenerative condition. But I think the way the Saints handled free agency gave us a true glimpse to what their draft strategy is. They went out and signed Chase Young, and on the flip side, they didn't chase down any big moneyed free agent offensive lineman. So the depth at in this draft, at not only tackle but guard, as you pointed out, I think it tells us that the Saints decided, okay, we're going to address edge rusher. We're going to hope for some development from Isaiah Foskey, a player I still really like. Maybe keep your fingers crossed that Peyton Turner is going to stay on the field. Continued development from Carl Granderson and a back to form from Cam Jordan. I know that's a lot of ifs, but if you get all that, all of a sudden your edge spot is looking pretty darn good. Offensive line, on the other hand, you still haven't signed Andrus Peat. He's still out there on the open market. Trevor Penning, he's looking like a draft bust right now. He has a lot to prove coming into this year. And then you factor in Ram's knee condition, and you can make a very very compelling argument that the Saints have significant needs at left tackle, right tackle, and at left guard, where James Hurst played very, very poorly last year. So again, I not only expect the Saints to draft a tackle in the first round, and luckily there's several available, but I expect them to bring in a guard at some point too, maybe as early as day 2.
Absolutely. I mean, if they went double offensive linemen in round 1 and round 2 at this point, I would not be surprised because, I mean, like you mentioned, Trevor Penning, we have not seen him develop well at all. So you can only hope that the offensive line coaches that they brought in, like John Benton and Rick Dennison, can help him develop, because we used the first round pick on him, and I would hope that he's not a bust. But like you said, it's looking that way. And signing Chase Young, you can only hope that the neck surgery goes well and that he plays up to his first round standard, because he was a former number 2 overall pick. And this team is very much lacking in the edge rusher department outside of Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson. I mean, you have Tano passing away, but he's not on an elite level. So you kind of need Chase Young to step up. So while we're on the topic of the draft, I just want to get some names out of you, because I've seen you write about so many people that I actually am a fan of. So let's just start with the group that we are probably going first round pick on, is offensive line. What are some names that you just absolutely think that the Saints should target at pick 14, or even if they trade down from like pick 14 to say 28, who should they target, Bob?
Well, I tell you, there's as many as 7 offensive tackles in this draft that I've watched that I think have the strong potential to come in and start immediately. Everybody believes that Joe Alt out of Notre Dame and Olu Fashanu from Penn State, both left tackles in college, will be the first 2 tackles off the board. Pretty good chance that they'll both be gone before 14. But after that, you have Talise Fuaga from Oregon State, a right tackle, in college. J.C. Latham, right tackle from Alabama, and Amarius Mims. hasn't played a lot, but has showed showed a lot of high upside when he has been on the field. Mims was a right tackle at Georgia, and then the kid that you mentioned, real versatile lineman. I like him a lot. Troy Fatanu, from Washington. There's a strong chance that all those guys I just mentioned are going to go off the board in the first round. At 14. I know we've never seen the Saints trade down in the first, since Mickey Loomis has become general manager. I think they're going to be watching what happens with Alt, Fashanu, and Fuaga very, very closely. And if all three of those are off the board at 14, I think then you could possibly see the Saints trade back a few picks and hoping to get a Latham, a Mims, a Fatanu, somewhere in the late teens or early 20s. If you wait on a tackle, Jordan Morgan is a kid from Arizona that I don't think enough people are talking about. Patrick Paul, it's a roll of the dice with Patrick Paul because he shows a lot of the same traits that Trevor Penning did. Big lumbering guy, will absolutely beat the heck out of defenders. But feet are a question mark, and awareness is a question mark. And a guy a lot of people like to slip down the draft boards. Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma. All those guys, I think, have the potential to come in and start right away for whatever team drafts them. But again, if you're the Saints and those top 2-3 tackles are off the board at 14, I still think you're taking an awful risk by trading down. And I've discussed this with people. I'm like, I get the logic behind it. You get some more picks. You're hoping that you're projecting that your guy or one of your guys are still there. But what if they're not? I don't think anybody wants to go into this season, with the giant question mark that Trevor Penning is performance-wise, and the giant question mark that Ryan Ramczyk is health-wise, without another rookie first-round tackle, first-round caliber talent at that position. So long and the short, again, it makes sense for the Saints to trade down if their top guys aren't there at 14, but I don't see it happening. I see New Orleans picking the best available tackle on the board, and then regrouping in rounds 2, and then later in day 2 or early in day 3, where we will see some trades from Mickey Loomis at that point.
I've made my point on Twitter or X, whatever people are calling it these days, and Facebook. I'm team trade down because, like you said, it's logical because we don't have a third or fourth. We have 3 fifth-round picks. You have 2 sixth-round picks. We have a whole bunch of those late-round picks, but you have no third or fourth. So I'm team trade down. But as we get ready to kind of wrap up the interview here, let's talk about a position that people absolutely want the Saints to draft at some point in this draft, whether it be first round, which I think is unrealistic, quarterback. There's been a lot of names connected to the Saints over the past, even as recently as the past couple weeks now, as we get closer. There's been names thrown around like Michael Penix Jr., who is slated to be like a first round pick, early second round pick. Spencer Rattler from South Carolina, and Michael Pratt, the local kid from Tulane, who absolutely killed it. Do you realistically at all see the Saints drafting a quarterback at any point in this draft, whether it be round 2 or round 5, 6, 7?
At any point, Logan, yeah, I do believe the Saints will probably draft a quarterback if they see one that they like. In the first round, absolutely not. And I'd be willing to bet my kid's college fund on that. I've said it several times. The decision at quarterback was made at the very day that they decided that Dennis Allen was coming back for a third season as head coach, and that guy's going to be Derek Carr. I know some of you might hate that, and I get it, but that's fact. The Saints won't be drafting someone in the first round. In the second round, I even see that being kind of a stretch because, again, this team, whether we agree or not, this team believes that they can contend for at least the NFC South title right now. And when you see as many holes on this team that exists, receiver depth, offensive line, and we discussed a lot, safety depth, which isn't talked about nearly often enough. I see the Saints going for one of those spots in the second round, even defensive tackle. Then you get to day 3. That's where I think the Saints are going to identify a guy that they like. And if he's still on the board, I could see a Michael Pratt. Maybe you take a chance on Jordan Travis, who I expected to slip into day 3 because of his injury problems. You're basically given a guy like Travis or anybody that you draft a red shirt year, similar to what we saw from Jake Haener last year. Maybe you like a big arm guy like Joe Milton. Maybe a guy like Sam Hartman, who played with A.T. Perry at Wake Forest. Was a couple of things that I pointed out about the Kubiak Shanahan offensive system that's worked for years and years and years. They want an intelligent quarterback, a guy that can move around the pocket, fairly well to escape pressure, make plays on the move, but most importantly, a guy with great football IQ that's going to digest a system quickly. And we've seen this system have success with let's just say underrated quarterbacks, day 3 prospects, far more than just Brock Purdy. We saw Brian Greasy have success in the system. Jake Plummer, Kirk Cousins, out in Minnesota. I'm not saying that the next day 3 draft choice for the Saints at quarterback is going to be the next Brock Purdy, but I do believe that if the Saints see a guy that fits what Clint Kubiak wants to have in his system, that's where we're going to see a quarterback. Would shock me if it's in day 2, and like I said, I'd be willing to bet my kid's college fund that it won't happen in round 1. It's not going to happen.
Well, we haven't taken a quarterback in round 1 since Archie Manning in 1971, so I don't see them breaking that streak anytime soon. Bob, absolutely, thank you so much for taking the time to hop on my Sports Étouffée show. I mean, it was a pleasure talking with you. I love all the work that you do. We
Thank you.
interact all the time on social media. You are just the nicest guy I've ever probably met in the media thus far. So I appreciate you coming
Logan,
on.
I have a whole lot of enemies that would disagree with you, but I thank you so much for the compliment. And as you know, I follow your work too. I'm a big fan. You're a rising star in the industry, if you ask me. So it was my privilege to come on with you, and thank you so much for asking me and having me on.
No problem. If you want to find Bob, just head on to Saints News Network or follow him on social media. He's posting great articles every single second of the day. 24/7. I mean, it's great stuff, in-depth stuff. So, with that being said, thank you so much for joining me, Bob.
Logan, I appreciate you. Have a great day. I know we'll talk soon.
You too. All righty. My next guest today is a dear friend of mine who I worked with and went to school with. He is with 104.5 ESPN Radio, my good friend Taylor Sharp. Taylor, thank you for joining me today on Sports Étouffée.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. It's my oh god, this is my first Skype call in probably 2 years. So it was a little rusty getting on, but we made it happen, dude. We're good to go.
We're good to go. So let's talk LSU. So we're in spring football now, but you've seen Brian Kelly before spring ball happened take a deep dive into the transfer portal. And we all love it when we get fresh new toys here at LSU, in a manner of speaking. What transfer do you think will have the biggest impact early on for this team?
Honestly, it's a guy that's a little bit under the radar, but if you're out there at practice, Jordan Gilbert, the A&M transfer, the safety, he played ball right here at U-High, a stone's throw from LSU's campus. He's kind of that guy I'm looking at, because what did you hear a couple weeks ago? Everyone kind of raised their eyebrows and they're like, wait a minute, Sage Ryan's playing the star role, which is, for those who are unfamiliar with Blake Baker's defense, it is a glorified nickelback position in Blake Baker's defense. That's all that means. I think that's perfect for Major Burns because, he's a good open field tackler. Burns' problem has been coverage in the back end. So you get to move Burns down. That opens up a safety spot. And right now in spring ball, the two safeties have been Sage Ryan and Jordan Gilbert kind of running with those ones. And they both looked really good, even Sage Ryan, because when you hear about Sage Ryan, you're like, okay, the inconsistencies. And I 100% understand that. He was a 5-star. He's came in. He hasn't lived up to the billing so far. But when you think about it, he came in as a safety. He really hasn't played safety. He's been here for 3 years. You put him at that nickel spot. He's played close to the line of scrimmage. Last year, out of necessity, you put him at cornerback, which is not an easy position to just be thrown into. And I thought he actually managed it okay. Now you finally put him back at safety, his natural position. You kind of saw this with Jacoby Stevens. A lot of people forget about this when he came in. You put him at outside linebacker because you needed bodies there. You moved him to receiver back in 2017. Finally, he gets his feet wet at the safety spot, and he was crucial to that 2019 defense. I mean, him and Grant Delpit on the back end really solidified those two positions for you. I could see Sage Ryan as well, but Jordan Gilbert, keep an eye out for him because with Major Burns moving down, that opens up one of those safety spots. And he's a guy that's been making plays so far in camp, and he's a little bit of an under the radar player.
There have been so many transfers that you could probably mention, but I've seen you talk about the defense and like just the passion so far, just from having Blake Baker there just for a few weeks now. And you're out there at practices from time to time. I know that. So talk about the difference from this year and last year going in the spring, because last year we had Matt House and now you have Blake Baker, who everyone just seems to just be on board with him. It just seems like it's clicking already.
Look, it's night and day because where does Blake Baker? His position is the linebacker spot, a lot like Matt House. So when you're out there, you get to see him one-on-one with the same position group that Matt House was at. It's night and day. He's a fiery guy. He wears cleats out there to practice to make sure that his guys, are doing the things right. He gets involved with the drills as well. He's a very hands-on player. And I know a lot of people last year, they were excited, myself included, about Harold Perkins moving to the inside. People hated the move. And then this year, people have been critical. Oh, you're going to try to move him there as well. I don't think the issue with Harold Perkins was moving him inside. I think you used him incorrectly. I think it was a scheme issue. Blake Baker's coming in with a new scheme. It's a new voice in that room. Don't look at it, oh, we're going to have the same results as last year, because you're not. You have the entire coaching staff that's different on the defensive side of the ball. So it has really just been night and day with how hands-on he is with his players.
Talk about night and day. Do you think, we're sticking with the coaching staff here, Mike Denbrock is gone. He's gone back up north to Notre Dame, which was sad to see, but you keep Joe Sloan, promote him from within, and promote Cortez Hankin to co-offensive coordinator. And of course, you lose Jaden Daniels because he's going into the draft. How different do you think this offense will be with Garrett Nussmeier at the QB1 spot and Joe Sloan being the essential number one play caller this season?
As far as the passing game goes, I don't think it's going to be much different as far as the deep to intermediate. I mean, we know Nussmeier, he can swing it with the best of them. There's not a throw on the field he can't make. What I'm looking at is the tight end position. They've used it a lot more in spring. That was kind of a forgotten role last year, and it's because, you're throwing it deep to talented guys like Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, and then if they're covered up, Jaden would just take off and run. Now you don't have a quarterback that runs as well as Jaden Daniels, and you're thin at the running back spot. There's only 2 scholarship running backs on the roster right now in spring. Kind of think of that tight end spot as almost an extension of the running game with that short passing game. There's a lot of throws out to the flats in them. Nussmeier's actually rolling out. Him and Mason Taylor have had a good connection. And, when it comes to Mason Taylor, he's a guy that burst onto the scene as a freshman. I mean, we saw him make plays in the opener against Florida State. We know about the 2-point conversion to beat Alabama. Last year, you're like, okay, he's going to take that step forward because of how the offense was designed, because the defense is so bad, the offense is having to constantly score, right? You're going for those home run plays every time. He kind of became a forgotten guy, but he was still efficient. I think he's going to get a ton more targets this year. So, I don't think the passing game is going to be a little different. Look how they use the tight end, almost an extension to that running game. They're going to use Josh Williams and Caleb Jackson, but they're going to pepper in that tight end a lot. That's a room that has a lot of talent. It's not just Mason Taylor. We saw Mac Markway go in there. He did a lot of things last year. Kamorian Pimpton is as big and as physical as any tight end in the country. You got Trey'Dez Green, a 5-star from Zachary, coming in that room as well. That's a room that I think is going to make a lot bigger impact. So scheme-wise, I don't think there's going to be a ton of difference just because he was able to learn under Denbrock. But as far as play calling goes, which players you're going to get involved, I think it's going to be a lot more spread out.
You mentioned the running game, and I want to touch a tad bit on the Trey Holly situation. Do you think he's been away from the team dealing with the legality issues and all that? Is he going to be coming back soon? Now that it's all settled?
Kelly kind of talked about that a little bit on Saturday, so it's still up in the air. Because if you remember, he had 2 or 3 charges against him. It was not just the attempted murder charge. So that charge is gone. From what I know now, he still has illegal use of a firearm and firing into the direction of a person. Now, those are serious charges. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a law enforcement officer. I just educated guess here. If the attempted murder charge goes away, it's going to kind of be harder for those 2 charges to stick as well. That's a total guess on my part. Kelly did say that if all works out, he can apply for reinstatement at the end of April. So he's not going to be back for spring football, but you could get him in here for summer workouts potentially and be back a full go for fall camp. And that's big for this running back room. I talked about it a minute ago. You got Josh Williams and Caleb Jackson. That's it. This is a running back room last fall that had 8 scholarship backs. You go from 8 to 2. And Trey Holly, look, for all the hype Caleb Jackson has, Trey Holly's just as good. I mean, I think this guy projects very well at the next level. He can block. He can catch out of the backfield. We know all the rushing records he set in high school up there at Union Parish. Make no mistake about it. This guy is a player. If you could get him back in your running back room, that would be big. Now, it's all going to play itself out, but I think that over the weekend, he's not out of the woods, but as far as LSU fans go, you saw a little bit of optimism. That's where I'll leave it.
So sticking with the offense, you see the running back. I mean, not running back, wide receiver room. Malik Neighbors is gone. Brian Thomas is gone. Now you look at it. You have Kyron Lacey, Aaron Anderson. You get C.J. Daniels from Liberty out the transfer portal. You have Chris Hilton. You have Sampson. I mean, you have so many weapons. One player in particular I'm interested to see how they use is Aaron Anderson. What can you tell me about the potential way that they're going to be using Aaron Anderson this year?
So a lot like I mentioned with Mason Taylor, kind of an extension of the running game. Aaron Anderson, right now they're kind of using him as like that guy we're kind of getting out into the flats, getting into open space because he's a speedy guy, because he's an athletic player. Now, I will tell you this, Aaron Anderson has a heck of a battle on his hands holding on to that number 3 spot because he's been kind of the guy that's taken the majority of those wide receiver 3 reps, if you will. Kyron Lacey and Chris Hilton, they are starters on this team. Their spots are locked down, I truly believe. So Aaron Anderson's been a guy that has been in that one role, but keep an eye out for Kyle Parker. They love this guy. He was a freshman last year. He redshirted, so he's going into his redshirt freshman year. A big body, a guy that has a lot of speed. And then C.J. Daniels, a guy you mentioned. He was a 1,000-yard receiver. He had 10 touchdowns at Liberty. He steps up in competition, but he's a big guy. I mean, he's 6'1.5", 6'2". So while Aaron Anderson, they're using him correctly, it's going to be a heck of a battle. I'm not sure he holds on to that starting spot.
It's going to be very interesting to see how they use because, I mean, there's speed all across the board in that wide receiver room. I want to go to the defensive side of the ball again. A player that we know good and well from our Southeastern days, who is now at LSU, Zy Alexander. We've seen him get hurt in that Army game of all games that he had probably no business of still even being in the game or even returning that interception. Lose him for the rest of the year. He was probably your best corner last year in that horrible defense. What is the update on Zy Alexander's injury, if you could tell me?
So he's not practicing. They decided to hold him out all spring long, but he's out there. You can see him on the sidelines. He's coaching up the younger guys, and I'm glad you brought him up because when you're not out there practicing, you kind of get forgotten by the media a little bit. He was a calming presence for that secondary a year ago. He was probably your most consistent cornerback last season. We talked about it. You had to play Sage Ryan there out of necessity. That was never a big fit. I mean, when you found Zy Alexander and he kind of stepped into that role, he was kind of your consistent starter. And when he goes down, you saw the big impact that it had on LSU's defense. But Logan, I got to tell you, freshman PJ Woodland, this is a name you're going to continue to hear. You've probably heard it a number of times. He is on a meteoric rise right now as far as spring practice goes. And he's a guy, when he came in, was only about 165, 170 pounds. So he's still got a lot of room to grow. Right now, it is him and Ashton Stamps. And again, you don't have Zy Alexander out there. I think he's going to be a big part of the DB room. But without Alexander there, Stamps and Woodland have kind of separated themselves. I mean, they're kind of the 1 and 2 right now in that room. I love Ashton Stamps. I loved him last year. He was a guy that a lot of people talked about last fall camp because he wasn't here in the spring. This is his first spring with the program. He and PJ Woodland, keep an eye on. Javian Toviano's another guy. You know, coming into the spring, you were like, oh, it's going to be Stamps and Toviano. Woodland's kind of passed up Toviano right now. I mean, Toviano's still in the mix, but he's kind of that rotational piece, that third corner, if you will. So while I think Alexander's going to be a big piece, a lot like Aaron Anderson, he's going to have to fight to hold on to that job because I think Stamps has played really well. He might be your number one corner right now. PJ Woodland looks excellent as a three-star true freshman. He looks like one of those diamond in the rough type guys that LSU always seems to find. And then again, JV and Toviano, you know how talented he is. So there's talent there, there's bodies there. There's just not a ton of experience on the playing field. But if you can get that talent right, you can get the 1-2. I think you're okay at corner.
It will. I'll be happy when he comes back. But since we're talking about the defense, we're going to be talking. We talk about the defense a lot on the show because I mean we're excited to see the improvements. The defensive line. You bring in Bo Davis to be your defensive line coach, who is considered one of the best defensive line coaches in the country, by the way, to people that don't know. How has the defensive line looked this spring? I mean, it can't look as mediocre as it did last year. I mean, with Bo Davis, you have to assume that, I mean, there's just a lot of aggression going into that practice.
So look, I've done a lot of sunshine pumping during this interview. This is the segment where I don't do a ton of sunshine pumping. It's rough. I'm not going to lie to you. This is, in my opinion, by far, even more so than the secondary, the biggest question mark on this team. You have Jacoby and Guillory. He's going to be a starter. He's never been a consistent starter for you, but he's a guy that's played in a lot of football games. You know what you're getting from him. A big body. Coach Kelly and Coach Jake Flint, they all the time talk about he's one of the strongest guys on the entire football team. So you know what you're getting with him. It's who's going to be that number 2 guy. Can you find a guy next to Jacoby and Guillory? Kimo McEneal is the guy they moved over from the O-line to the D-line. It's never a good thing when Kimo McEneal, a guy who's been here for 2 weeks in that defensive line room, is already fighting for a starting spot. Now you have Jalen Lee there as well. That's who's kind of battling with McEneal. He's the guy who transferred from Florida. He played a little bit last year, not a ton. You got Dominic McKinley coming in, but he's not coming in until the fall. So for the spring, you got about 3 or 4 guys, and that's really it. Bo Davis is, you paid him over $1 million a year to coach this defensive line room. He's going to earn that paycheck this year. Make no mistake about it. This is kind of the biggest question mark. When I'm looking at, Coach Kelly talked about trying to cross-train guys, and everybody thought, oh, you're going to cross-train an offensive lineman to a defensive lineman. Not so fast. You're going to cross-train a defensive end to move down to defensive line. Savion Jones is a guy that while he's your starter at defensive end, he's 285 pounds. You put a little bit of weight on him, he's a guy that can slide down. We saw Paris Shand last year. He was a rotational piece, but he made some nice plays. You saw every time there was a batted ball at the line of scrimmage, it seemed like Paris Shand was the one that's doing it. He's 6'4", 280 pounds. He's got the frame to add a little bit more weight. So you can mix and match. You're going to have to kind of cram it together this year. I do think there's talent in that room, though. You just lack depth. If you can get Dominic McKinley up to speed, I think that's going to be the key, and keep Jacoby and Guillory healthy. I think you can do it. You can put a Band-Aid on it this year. It's not going to be an excellent room, but I think you can manage so far.
You can only improve from last year on the defensive side of the ball. Let's be honest here. Final question to wrap up this interview. I mean, we've touched a little bit on Garrett Nussmeier. We've mentioned Jaden Daniels is gone. He's going to be the number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft. Nussmeier has waited his turn for so long. I mean, through the Orgeron era to even the Brian Kelly era. I mean, he had to sit behind so many quarterbacks. It is his time now. We've gotten a little glimpse of him and what it would look like with him as the starter when he played against Wisconsin, and it was not bad at all. Do you think he can kind of have what I call a Matt Flynn type of season? And if he has a sort of season like that, does that kind of make LSU successful, or is there a lot on his shoulders riding into this season, do you think?
I mean, there's for sure a lot riding on his shoulders, right? He's going to be the starting quarterback. You know, you and I have talked about Garrett Nussmeier a lot. He's a guy that I've been high on since he stepped foot on campus. I think his ability to throw the ball, his natural ability to throw the football, is really unlike anything we've seen in a while here at LSU. I mean, I think his arm in general rivals that of Joe Burrow. Not to say he's the player that Joe Burrow is. He's not. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just saying ability to throw the football. He's right up there with the best of them. You talk about, can he have a Matt Flynn type season? I hope my guy doesn't hear this. I think he's better than Matt Flynn. I think that the bar should be set a little bit higher than a Matt Flynn. Flynn was great, but you got to think, the passing game in college football in general is not what it was then as it is now. You got to expect a little bit more from Garrett Nussmeier. I can tell you he's been a lot more of a vocal leader at practice. You can tell that he's really taken on this QB1 persona. Well, he's not only is he like, hey, I'm learning from the guy, I am the guy. And, he was with Joe Sloan a year ago. It's hard to think about because the Brian Kelly era has really flown by. This is year 3 of Garrett Nussmeier and Brian Kelly together. There's familiarity within this program. I get it. You're replacing a Heisman Trophy winner, and everybody worries about that. But you're not turning it over to a brand new player. You're turning it over to a guy that doesn't have a ton of starts under his belt, but he's been in this program for 3 years now. I think he's ready to go. And honestly, Logan, I do want to mention this. As far as the backup QB spot goes, there's a heck of a battle there right now between Ricky Collins and AJ Swan. I think AJ Swan has the advantage there. I think that's why you brought him in. He's a guy that has started double-digit games in the SEC. He did some nice things at Vanderbilt. I mean, he was inconsistent, but again, how much of that was AJ Swan's fault? How much of that was that he had no talent around him and he was at a disadvantage talent-wise every single week? He's a big-bodied guy. He's looked really good as well. So even the depth behind Nussmeier, it actually looks a little bit better than I thought it would at this point during spring.
You can honestly say, the depth at quarterback, Brian Kelly has done a great job going to get Swan. You have Ricky Collins. You have all these other high-end quarterbacks coming in, very soon. Underwood's coming in a couple years or next year. Taylor, this has been great. Loved having you on. I plan on having you on even more. You cover LSU in its entirety, from football to basketball, baseball, everything. I plan on having you on to discuss all of that very soon. So I appreciate you coming on and taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It was fun. Let's do it again.
That is Taylor Sharp with 104.5 and ESPN. You can catch him on YouTube. Sometimes he fills in for T-Bob and the gang on their YouTube show, Off the Bench. Thank you for joining me.